What's up, fellow gamers? Phreak here. I'm the design lead of Summoner's Rift Team's live pod, and let's talk about patch 25.15. Go right into it. Behavioral systems update, as per usual, as that is what I spend the majority of my time on. 4 detections went in or updated compared to previous patch. One is a new detection. There were bugs, and a case that was overlooked. It's 100% false positive, so we went through few dozen games, 70 or so, just to get a really solid sample. And it's like, okay, we're getting basically drowned out in false positives, fixed the bugs, made what I think is a good accommodation for the overlooked case where it wasn't griefing. And we'll see in 2 weeks or a week and a half or so if this was effective and if this is salvageable, or if we need to sort of put in more work to get this detection to higher quality. But oh well, one of the 4 wasn't in a very good state. The other, so next one up is version 2 of stuff that was in the patch before. We're up to over 95% accuracy. This is one where we didn't get to review enough games on, so it might be higher, but this is like 95% or more. It's looking pretty good. We'll keep looking at it and make sure it's going to be of high quality, but looking pretty good here. Next one is V2 of something else that went in the patch before, and we're up to about 70% accuracy, so we're getting there. I finished redoing some of the script today, so hope we're in a much better state in terms of detecting only malicious behavior and not catching things that aren't in that case, but trending in the right direction, certainly. And then a new detection that was added for this patch is doing pretty well. We're definitely catching a lot of real positives, but there are false positives that I think are relatively easily caught, and so did a refactor of that script today as well, and it's looking, I think it's going to be pretty good, but we'll see. Again, we mostly were hitting real positives, but obviously we can't hit something, with this level of accuracy, but should help things quite a lot. And then of course I'm not the only person working in this space. One of the other designers who's working on BSIS did at least some tuning updates and stuff that he's working on, in addition to longer term stuff that some of it we'll probably be able to announce in the near-ish future as stuff comes online, and we're like, hey, we're making this change, how the system works and whatnot. But still steady progress being made. Honestly, there's some really good stuff coming out of BSIS that throughout this year, I think you will see some more like really measurable, like, oh, that was a good change kind of stuff going on. So hey, just want to keep you updated on how that's going. Yunara came out last patch. Forgot to talk about her in the previous patch preview, but this champ is freaking sweet. Champ designer and everyone else who was involved did a really good job of making a really, really cool champion. Want to point out, power level wise, one of the cool things that we have from our champion mastery indexed win rate sheet is we can actually not just look at, oh, win rate by day, but be like, we'll just cut out people who are first time the champion. If you're at mastery level 3 or higher on Yunara, you have a 55% win rate on her. Now, asterisk on that is if you're the kind of player who got to mastery 3 on Yunara, means you played a lot of games of Yunara on the same account, which means you probably tanked your win rate initially by losing a bunch of games, right? I think her, first game's win rate is in the 40s, right? And then when you get to the champion, your MMR is now lower than it's supposed to be. And so even if she's like only balanced, you're going to go on the way back up by playing a balanced champion, but having a lower MMR than you deserve as a player, right? On the other hand, of course, the champ could actually be overpowered. Don't get me wrong. I tend to believe that she's on the strong side and that long term she'll need power taken out. But for now, she's about 47% win rate over the last 2 or 3 days. It's not moving very heavily by day. I would be shocked if she crossed generic 50% win rate anytime in the next couple of weeks. But that said, again, we will keep keeping an eye on her, but the win rate, like growth by day, is slowing down. So in terms of generic win rate, it's going to be below 50 for a while. That's fine. I will continue to maintain that we should launch champions where their win rate is sub 50, but they're technically a little bit too strong long term, so that players can grow into the champion because they haven't played the 100 games of this that they've played on other champions. And so the baseline power level needs to be such that none of you have the experience, so here's some training wheels. I think that is correct. I think it's generally gone pretty well. I think this is a pretty, just a very, very good champ launch overall. Seems very popular, all really good stuff. Great. And again, as players keep up, we will make whatever balance changes are needed for the champion long term. On to the next thing, we have 2 relatively small patchworks that went into this patch. First up is Illaoi. The marching orders were make the vessel mechanic less frustrating, up to even full removal, and compensate power as needed, and do what you can there. My net goal from doing some research into the win rate, I did the work here on this champion, was a net 1% win rate increase. The goal being a 1% win rate increase specifically in moderately high MMR, roughly Emerald plus, and with the expectation that this change would probably be less power positive in lower MMRs and more power positive in higher ones, but again, indexing towards about 1% in the roughly Emerald Plus cohort. So the changes are a strict buff to her passive total attack damage ratio, which functionally is about 3% more damage to almost the entire kit, other than base autos, teammates hitting the puppet, and her W. Everything else is purely based on the passive damage of the tentacles, right? Q is percent more damage to tentacles. So ultimately, it is roughly 3% more damage to most of her throughput. So pretty big amount of power there, and honestly, a pretty good amount of damage. And that's about 1% win rate just by itself. Next one is the internal cooldown of tentacle slams during the spirit phase, the first half of E. That cooldown has been dropped by a full second, levels 1 through 6. This means that if she pulls a spirit, she is, unless they can break the tether in time, she will get 2 slams from passive tentacles, not only 1. Before, she would have to wait until level 7. They wouldn't be able to slam in time to hit. So going all the way down to 4 seconds allows them to get a second hit during the spirit phase, during the first phase of E. So that should be a pretty meaningful amount of power. And then additionally, on the back half, I guess I forgot to write it here. Sorry about this. The vessel duration, which is you break the tether or she kills the spirit, the duration of that debuff has been dropped from 10 seconds to 3 seconds. That means if you're one of Illaoi's opponents, you don't have to dance around for 10 seconds waiting for tentacles to spawn and dodge the thing and do whatever. You're like not allowed to recall, all that kind of stuff. Instead, now it's 3 seconds, which is enough to basically spawn 1 tentacle, enough for it to arm, wake up, and slap at you, and then the debuff ends. And so you're not playing DDR for an extra 7 seconds there, which we think will be a really meaningful improvement in the frustration of fighting this champion. We think this will help a little bit with MMR skew. She's a lot better in lower MMRs than higher MMRs, where, again, playing DDR for 10 seconds isn't hard, but if you just forget or whatever, or you're mentally overwhelmed or whatever it is, again, kind of mechanic that we're pretty sure is going to be low elo skewed. But of course, we also know that it has impacts to the character as well. In low elo, like, I mean, somebody should get kills because of it and people screw up, but it also can spawn you more tentacles in a team fight and things like that. It's like there's relevance, don't get me wrong. This is why, again, we're trying to overcompensate, because there is some power loss there. But the goal being, hey, let's lower frustration of facing against the champion. So one of the things is that when you break the tether and become a vessel, or she kills the spirit and you become a vessel, it used to be that it would spawn tentacles and then paint them with a debuff saying, hey, don't attack for about a second. That debuff no longer exists, so the tentacles will slap right away on spawn. This should make them more reactive overall in the vessel sort of timeline, and it should be a little bit of power there, of course. Usually the way it works out, though, is you are still not slowed while the slam is going in, so a player can still dodge it overall, but you're getting the spawn. Cool, congratulations. And then various tool fixes, the passive and the Q, like, damage readout never updated with the actual damage of Q, the passive percent more damage rank up, and so your totals will be accurate how much damage is actually done, which means you can look at it and be like, oh, I will actually one-shot casters. I can look at my damage number and see that it says 374, and that damage will actually kill casters. I click on the caster menu, now I know. Of course, you could have hit and known for next time, but hey, it's there for that. So the goal, again, is plus 1% win rate for Illaoi. If we undershoot or overshoot, we will compensate next patch, but making our best guess at let's make what we think is a materially better champion for the game League of Legends for kind of all parties involved. Let's get the power level where it's supposed to be, and if we get power level wrong, we will readjust. Next is a Rek'Sai patchwork. Marching orders were put E back to true damage. Seems like free real estate. I did the work here as well. This was my bad that it was even here in the first place. I actually believed that players would appreciate max health physical damage more, seeing larger numbers, seeing, you know, the big chunk on a buff camp or something, but also that they will see like a large number on the tooltip itself and think that was going to be a stronger ability. This did not pan out, so I am wrong. My bad. So we're going back to true damage. Slightly different math than before, but going back to true damage because that one was just clearly more appreciable, and so let's go back to the pretty, white number crit text. And then I wanted to give myself some time to do more work on the champion because I know there's plenty wrong with Rek'Sai, and I thought I could make material improvements with a relatively small amount of work. Again, most of my time is still spent on behavioral systems, but I wanted to carve myself out an extra day and a half beyond just putting the E in and testing and making sure it worked, to try to find other improvements to the champion. So this is still moving in the direction of make Rek'Sai have a more functional aggressive diver pattern. So go in, be pretty aggressive, but allow her to be more proactive and less like weirdly an assassin, but not really an assassin, and just, again, improve what I could that was relatively easy to do. So first is there's another rank up incentive on the W. Now the knock-up lockout scales down with rank from 10 to 6. There is a world in which W max first or second becomes a real build. We'll see. I don't expect that to really be likely, but if it does, I'm not against it. I'm not offended. If it's her best build by a lot, probably have to do some retuning to make sure that's not what's going on. That would be probably too unintuitive for most players, and I don't think the average Rek'Sai player wants to be a knock-up bot, but if the choice is there to index toward crowd control, especially if it gets her into pro, great. I think that is a good thing. I think niche champions like that showing up as fringe pro viable champions, generally positive for the champ overall, more eyes to discover that she's cool, things like that. Next one, which I think is probably the biggest change shape-wise, is the R damage is changing from missing health to max health damage. The math works out pretty much exactly that if your target is at 40% current HP or 60% missing, the damage is basically identical. But if they were healthier than that, R does more damage. If they were lower than that, R does less damage. This ends up being a spell that really frags. If you just like hit a random target dummy at max HP with no like items, you're doing like 500 post mitigation damage to them. Like this thing hits really quite hard. Want to point out that there's quite a lot of power, but it allows Rek'Sai to basically say, hey, look, I don't have to save this for execution, but I can be like, well, who's available? I have some mind share around which targets are marked, who can I cast this on, and if I can I immune some damage, do some cool things, and, block out, maybe use the Unstoppable to dodge some kind of a stun or other CC. Can I get away because I'm getting chased down? Like, there's still a lot of skill expression using this ability well, but saying, no, it's not just an assassination spell. In fact, you can lead in with this, right? You can be like, oh, I found an isolated squishy. I land Prey Seeker. I launch him with the ulti. I chunked him by third of their health, quarter of their health just from that. Let's fight. I think that is generally a good thing. It allows her to be, again, more of a proactive diver towards skirmisher. She's kind of in a lot of different places, right? I think she's kind of in the middle as like diver. She's pretty crowd control. She's got this like really heavy regen, like tanky output, like a Juggernaut kind of would. And then also she's just quite mobile and a little bit in and out, which is, a little skirmishery, right, as well. And so there's a little bit of like, I don't want to make her pick a lane if I can help it, but try to make sure all these parts of the kit actually work pretty well. None of this is assassin, and so moving R to something more proactive, I think, is a good choice for the champion overall. And it's one of the complaints I'd seen the most from Rek'Sai players, is that the R really did not fit the kit. And so I was like, look, this is not hard to get the math right. Let's do that. Also, 2 QOL changes here. One is it resets your W cooldown. The way Rek'Sai works on live is it's correct for you to manually unburrow, then press R, because the way R works, it's got this long, like 1 second or so ceremony to casting the spell, and only when you start the leap did it end your burrow, which then started the 4-second cooldown before you could reburrow, which means if you were smart and you like knew this like archaic, like weird, minor edge case, you should manually unburrow, then press R so that your cooldown started about a second earlier, which would let you like land a burrow within about 1 second of landing on your opponent. Not too bad. And now it's like, look, when I press this, it's going to set W to a 1 second cooldown, which is functionally a reset in all cases. By the time your leap is done, your W has reset, you're fine. But basically just coming in and being like, hey, look, yeah, we have to unburrow you. Of course, you're gonna end above ground. That's probably just correct for the champion overall, but let's let you burrow again so that like, hey, I land Prey Seeker, I fly at you, I can W right click, and yeah, the whole process takes like 0.85 seconds, but I can go, burrow, knock you up, and start with some crowd control. It's not quite Vi ult, it's not gonna do that level of crowd control, that much reliability, but you've got an extra tool to start things off and feel good about it. This should be pretty nice. Other thing is a sort of a QOL. If you were in the middle of casting R and your target died before you were done casting, it would put it on a 10-second cooldown. That is now 5. If it's 0, you would use R intentionally to like constantly dodge skill shots. Be like, that person's low, go untargetable. Okay, that person's low, go untargetable. It's like, no, there has to be enough of a lockout where it's not like correct for you to spam this at really weird timings. 5 seconds is, I think, enough for that. 10 just felt like, oh, I guess I don't get this the entire fight now. Hopefully feels better. Again, not meant to be really like win rate impacting, but should feel better to play Rek'Sai. So as for the E changes, again, going from max health physical damage when fully empowered to simply deals increased true damage when empowered. Cooldown has been dropped from 10 seconds to 6. Want to point out that I mathed out the damage to be roughly equivalent before and after. So like the old max health physical and the new flat with bonus AD ratio true damage is going to be relatively equivalent. in like roughly your average PvP scenario. Obviously, if you're hitting like a Scion or a Cho'Gath, it's worse. If you're hitting a Rammus during W, it's better. But trying to pick like an amalgamation of an average champion, it's roughly the same with some minor breakpointing at various points, but it's like kind of the same spell. Now, for the most part, Rek'Sai can't easily use a 6-second cooldown on the E, but again, lower cooldowns on spells allows you to play more of a fighter pattern, less of an assassin pattern, trying to still reiterate towards that being the play style here. But a cooldown buff helps to reinforce what's going on. I actually had tried a cooldown reset and auto attack, but there's so much going on in the jungle for Rek'Sai in the first place. You're tracking 2 sets of spells, you're tracking Fury, you're trying to figure out if you want to burrow and do knockouts and stuff and execute their spells. It's like, there was so much going on that also tracking a dynamic E cooldown based on autos was like, this is clearly way too much. We don't need to add even more difficulty and complexity to Rek'Sai. And so I went, okay, let's, instead of doing a cooldown buff on the auto, let's just make it's a lower cooldown, it's 6 seconds, you'll have more access, great, congratulations, go press your buttons. And because the old PvE damage had this big max health damage with a pretty generous cap, this just simply dealt less damage in PvE, and so the lower cooldown also helps to make sure that it's a bit more equivalent before and after, so that your PvP damage is about the same, and occasionally you'll get more casts, and then in this case, because the damage per cast is lower against jungle monsters because they have so much health and often not very much armor, the cooldown buff allows it to be roughly similar DPS in that case as well. Other change here is doing a little bit of refactoring and fudging how the damage is done, ultimately buffing the unempowered version of E, simply as a way to make the champion a little bit easier to play. So before I changed Rek'Sai E to like max health physical on top, it would deal double damage and then also convert to true, which really meant that empowered E did between like triple and quadruple, sometimes even more than quadruple if they had a lot of armor, 3, 4, 5x the damage, which meant the difference between empowered E and unempowered E was like, don't even press the spell. Like, why even bother? Because when you can get to like 4x, 5x damage, it's like, of course you should never press this, you're griefing. And so what I changed this to was the unempowered spell is 80% as much damage, but it's physical. What that means is in sort of total throughput is empowered E is still like 70% or so more damage by being functionally 1.25x and true. And it can still be like up to triple damage later on, but it makes the failure case of pressing this ability badly on Rek'Sai a little bit nicer. The point is, it is still clearly correct, and she's functionally balanced around, all champions are balanced around having some level of mastery. No champion is balanced around mastery level 0, or, 1 or 2 or 3 or whatever. So it's purely a way to, like, raise her generic win rate to let people who might enjoy Rek'Sai have a better time playing Rek'Sai, and has functionally no impact to Rek'Sai mains, because, like, okay, yeah, sure, 1 in 10 times you, like, don't have a choice, you gotta just, like, throw E out there anyway, because they're gonna get away, they're gonna flash, or whatever it is. Okay, fine. It's a little bit of power there, but this is really just be like, look, Rek'Sai novices have a little bit of power because, like, it doesn't need to be that garbage. It can just be, like, kind of weak spell instead of a trash spell when unempowered, which I think is very reasonable, while still being, like, it's clearly correct to wait. You should try to do that. You should try to build tension. Okay, cool. Other 2 changes are basically just ways to make room for changes I thought were worthwhile. So one is a 20/10/0 second cooldown nerf on R. This brings rank 1 R to 120 from 100. It brings rank 2 to 100 from 90. I think that's the math. That's pretty minor, but it does matter because keep in mind R does more than just damage. It is a dash, it is a untarget ability, it is, stuff there. So this has some overall win rate impact, don't get me wrong. But it's to make room for the fact that I'm pretty sure R per cast is just much better, because I would say the average target is, if you're using the spell correctly now, going to be higher than 40% health. And so it's a truly increased damage to the R. E, I think, is probably on net slightly better. And I think this lockout is on net slightly better. I mean, it literally has to be. And so the other nerf is about 1% win rate room of armor. A little bit of flat armor, a little bit of armor growth. Again, trying to bring down top-end armors in the game that are a bit too high, make lethality kind of a bad stat. Continuing the work here by any time I can, and it makes sense. Move in that direction. I also want to acknowledge that Rek'Sai is far from perfect. There's more that could certainly be done with more time. That said, I believe all these changes are correct for the champion. That should make her feel better. From what I've seen of people reacting to the initial changes, they seem positive, which is good. Please let me know what feels good and doesn't. Happy to do small-scale follow-up as needed. I think this champ is really, really cool. So there's the Rek'Sai changes. Buffs and adjustments. So Kled, follow-up from the Kled changes of last patch. Mastery-informed win rate data suggests that Kled lost around 0.75% of win rate overall when comparing individual mastery cohorts. This is not just like, oh, a flood of bad Kled players came in and like that tanked his win rate, because we can control for that pretty reasonably well, and doesn't appear to be the primary cause here. So Kled appears to be a bit weaker, but as far as everything else working, he's on fighter builds, he's building Titanic, great stuff, good job, well done Endstep and everyone else who helped make sure this went out well. Big thumbs up there. However, the read he has is that Kled is not doing as well as we would like while dismounted, and so playing up the dismounted durability lever that he added on purpose, which is not only giving Kled a guaranteed flat 4 armor and MR when dismounted, but also scaling the amount of bonuses you could get based on number of nearby enemy champions by, it now roughly 2.5x instead of 2xing based on number of enemy champions. So a small increase there. So in team fights, 10 armor and MR, and another 2.5% instead of 2% of your bonus health as armor and MR as well to help dismounted Kled remount inside of team fights. Next change is Riven. So we know Riven lost about 2% win rate last patch, about 1.8, somewhere around there. But of course, we had attempted a bug fix to let Riven, let her Q3 get a full duration knockup on people who were against walls. That ended up creating a bug where she would send people across the map like it was a Gragas ultimate. So for now, we are simply going to bug fix that Q3. It's not super common, but it certainly exists. And we'd like time to measure the exact impact of that bug itself. Our expectation is that it's pretty low impact in total win rate, but we could be surprised by it. And so Riven, we think, is numerically actually quite weak. Like we have, again, we have the mastery data, right? One thing I've seen people complain about is like, wow, Riven doesn't have a really high win rate. What's going on? Like, keep in mind, Riven is like, I think she's actually top 3. I'm not certain, but she's like clearly top like 5%. Riven is one of the most mained champions in League of Legends. So compared to other difficult high mastery requirement champions, Riven is truly mostly played by mains, is truly mostly played by, nearly one tricks. She is way, way up there. So she's a champion whose measurable win rate data is inflated by her player base. Yasuo's up here, Katarina's up here. There are champions like Riven whose win rates are inflated because their players are just that good. Not all difficult champs are like this. There are plenty of difficult champions who aren't played mostly by mains. I don't have the list top of my head, but I know they're out there, and our balance strategy is, for step 1, measure the win rate of moderate to high mastery players. Not just one tricks, but people who are basically like roughly the top 25%. And Riven, like, for a normal champion, that cohort is about a quarter of their players. For Riven, it's more than half. So, right, most Riven players are in the we balance around this level of play. Most other champions, most players aren't there. Riven is win rate inflated because her players are good. So I'm sorry that the public data websites don't put this out for you guys to measure. I wish they would. I would love to make it easy for you to look at the same kinds of things that we're looking at, so you can, make your own slightly more informed, soliloquies about how some champs are busted or whatever. I would love if you guys could have that information. I hope some stats websites out there somewhere, because I'm pretty sure mastery level is on and or prior games is on the API that people could pull. Actually, no, because I know that some of these sites do a somewhat version of this. Yeah, look, Riven is, anyway, the point is, when we were measuring for 0.14, Riven was like about 1% overpowered based on mastery data. And so our goal was to nerf her by about 1% win rate and try to retain her early lane power, which is like what Riven players seem to really, really want on this champion. And by doing so, it's like, cool, Riven is balanced. We will retain the things that Riven players like about Riven, and then she'll be a balanced top laner where if you know your champion or a counter pick, you can beat Riven. You did it. Good job. Most people don't have the same level of skill they have on Riven as Riven players have on Riven. That's a skill issue. I do not want to punish Riven players for maining their champion and artificially deflating their win rate just because they're good at their champion. I think that is not okay. If it has to be done because we want the game to like appear balanced, sure, right? Like there's something beyond the first step of what's numerically balanced, and there's like what makes the best game. But I'm going to always start at numerically balanced and then be like, if I'm really convinced that Riven is meant to be deflated because we really care about the experience of other top laners and they just aren't allowed to be beaten up by Riven, yeah, maybe. Right now, that's not the case. Moving on, finally. Corki, meant to be a power neutral adjustment here, taking 0 to 20 damage off the Q, giving it back 10% bonus AD, and giving a 5% bonus AD ratio onto the R as well. The goal here, basically, very lightly pushing him toward Infinity Edge style builds, right? Overall higher AD ratio means the item with 70 attack damage is going to be a little bit more valuable. Okay, cool. That's really light though, because things like Shojin and Overlord's Bloodmail eventually have a lot of attack damage as well. Bloodmail probably has too much AD and it's just perennially slept on, but oh well. Point is though that we are trying to somewhat soften Corki's power curve. So as a way of like measuring it, if Kale is a 12, Corki is an 8 in the other direction. And so I think we would still want Corki to be somewhat of an early game champion, but 2/3 as skewed as Kale is a bit high for us. And so bringing him down a little bit by, right, taking away a little bit of early game power. It appears that Corki's power is not like the level 1, 2, 3, but the like sort of mid to late laning phase. So Q rank up is really good for that. And again, giving him that power back in what we hope to be roughly win rate neutral by letting him scale up at, about 2 to 3 items and feel better about that one overall. But clearly worse early pushing, worse early lane bully power. Other one is a simple change to Baron Nashor, getting rid of his passive health regen and giving him roughly the same amount of HP back in terms of flat health, so that an overall fight against Baron takes about the same amount of time, but no longer will he regen mid-combat and make you miss your smite. We go on to nerfs. We start with the simple ones. We saw from Braum that -5 armor was 0.38% win rate. We saw from last year that -4 armor on Leona was like 0.6, and so with an increasing sample of tank support armor nerfs, 3 armor, which is normally about 1% for regular champions, does not remotely appear to be the case for tank supports here. Now, certainly some of that is there's plenty of magic damage down in bot lane. Most enchanters are magic damage. Most even bot lane tanks are magic damage. Yeah, AD carries are most physical, and there's only about like a 10% mage pick rate down there. So anyway, let's try to hit actually 1% win rate here with large numbers that like look really, really large, but are aimed at about 1% win rate. So Alistar, -7 armor, takes him away from first place armor in the game. Braum, we were trying to go for about 1% win rate. We got a third of what we wanted. So we said, well, if 5 armor was not even 0.4% win rate, let's take away 5 armor again and get about that much, and then keep going and take the 0.2 for growth to get a little bit more there and try to hit the total of that 1% win rate we wanted. Okay, great. We move on to Rel. Rel, another tank support who's doing a bit too well statistically. She's big in pro. Alistar, Braum, and Rel are all kind of the same bucket, where they are statistically overpowered for solo queue when we measure high mastery cohort players. Now, to be clear, like the end result is that Braum will probably be above 50% because Braum is easy. And so much like Nami, who's in this boat as well, like Nami is one of only 2 champions right now whose low supports, I should say, whose low mastery win rate is above 50% because she's that easy to play. By the way, her high mastery win rate is balanced versus other supports. Like she's just so easy to play that no one has win rate loss. And so yeah, she basically scales from 50 to like 51.5, and that's the champion. She's kind of done at that point. Anyway, Braum is going to be in a kind of similar boat where it's like he's going to probably have an above 50% win rate. He's really easy. That's just him being balanced. Alistar a little bit harder, Rel a little bit harder. These champs, again, when accounting for mastery, about 1% win rate overpowered, so going for nerfs here. Keep in mind, Rel, functionally every team fight, you're going to have this shield, and so it's 5 to 25 health off of her, in addition to the fact that it is sometimes also health regen, where you might get multiple shields poked off over the course of a laning phase, and so it's also health regen instead of, in addition to kind of base HP. If it's under nerf, we can always go for more, but aiming for about 1% on Rel here. Pantheon, nerfs finally in, nerfing his Q monster mod from 1.05 to 90%, so a solid 14% less monster damage on Q should be pretty meaningful for his jungle win rate, which is where he's pretty much pulling the bans and seems to be overperforming, and so a simple Pantheon nerf. Relia, going for a nerf that we hope to be solo Q skewed and mid lane skewed. One thing that can be scary here is if Aurelia's base health regen goes too low, she has to really, really aggressively go for all-ins. Yes, she has a lot of health regen via her Q, getting percent total AD every time it hits. And usually for champs like that, we have to deflate their base regen because they've got this really good regen tool. But it can always be scary being in the spot where this champion is, or any given champion, is really, really, really feast or famine. If you can't stop them, they're full forever. If you can stop her, she's not even allowed to hit anything and get her health back. So we'll have to be a little bit cautious around this, and if it overshoots and the gameplay quality gets bad, we'll have to revert and find a different nerf, but the hope is about 1% win rate on Relia, who gained a lot of win rate off of Bork and even Kraken Slayer, and try to skew towards top lane being better, and try to skew towards not being as nerfed in pro play. We go for slightly more complicated nerfs here, where you can debate whether or not it's actually power negative, though in all these cases we are aiming for them to be nerfs. Bel'Veth losing 10 flat damage on Q. It's a lot of her damage. She's often getting 3 hits in any given gank because W resets it. This is a really, really, really big damage source overall. We are fully compensating the jungle mod here, so her clear is unchanged, but her champ damage, of course, is down by 10, so less of an early bully. We are trying to continue to push her toward a late game scaling champion, so that brings us to the passive change, which we think is going to be pretty low impact overall. But it's stretching out the passive attack speed per stack. Instead of scaling to level 17, it scales to level 18, and it scales to a number that is about 10% larger. What that means is at level 18 specifically, the passive is 10% stronger overall. At level 17, it is 5% stronger overall. So it's the same ability at rank 0, at that champion level 0. But that said, you kill your first camp and you're level 2, so whatever. Basically, it linearly scales from 0 to 5% more AS per stack. And then at level 18, you snap your fingers and it's now 10% more AS per stack. And so smoothly, lightly increasing your power as time goes on, both in terms of, power per stack and, power per level, moving up in that direction. Next is Master Yi. We're aiming for about a 1% win rate drop here. It's another one where we're changing both the base value and the jungle mod here. So we're nerfing the base damage of his Alpha Strike by 10 to 50. However, we're increasing the total attack damage ratio by 20%. By 0.2, which means you can think of it a couple ways, which is, his base AD recompensates this, and so the actual damage nerf of the spell is not as big as you might look from it being this number, but also the scaling he gets from longswords is 40% stronger because, 0.7 is 40% more than 0.5. And so for the high AD Yuntal IE builds, that scaling from AD is 40% stronger. Looking at the math, I am pretty sure that high AD Master Yi builds will actually be win rate positive, or at least damage positive at various points in time, whereas his most common build of on hit is about 1% overpowered, and we think this is going to be roughly the nerf that gets what we want here. The other side of it is we are compensating the jungle mod a certain amount to get the numbers that we want here. Master Yi has a slightly above average jungle clear. This will make his 1 through 3 clear ever so slightly slower. And then of course, once you get into mid game, it's the same kind of stuff here where it's going on there, but minus 15 damage on rank 1Q, and eventually minus, 55? If that's the number? Yeah, minus 55 damage. But again, a 20% total attack damage ratio can be compensated for with enough total AD, right? That's the changes there on Master Yi, hoping to close the gap a little bit on hit versus crit. It's not going to fully close it, but this does mathematically put IE crit Q's attack damage ratio as high as it was back from 7 years ago when it was made to trigger on hit. So at least that part of the gold scaling for the crit spell is back where it was, basically. Neela is getting some what we expect to be power negative adjustments here. The goal being to flatten our power curve some, give her some more early game agency instead of just hiding under your tower hoping you can get healed enough. And so giving her 2 flat attack damage is going to affect her last hitting, as well as the Q damage itself. Keep in mind though, rank 1 Q is a 90% total AD ratio, so it's only 1.8 damage on rank 1 Q. And then nerfing her attack speed growth by 0.75%. Now, if this were a normal AD carry, this would be about 2/3 of 1% win rate, and this would be about 1.5% win rate. And so if you're Jinx or Ashe or whatever, this would have been a pretty meaningful, roughly 1% win rate drop. Now, keep in mind also, Q's cast time does scale with bonus AS. Now that cast time caps pretty early on, but your first few levels, this will have an impact and impacted as well. So your Q is impacted by your base AD and the AS growth to some degree, and then you get into mid game and it's the value of 2 AD in mid game is pretty a little bit less meaningful, but obviously when you have more AS and then also the thing actually caps, it's of course, a bit less meaningful as well. Again, the goal is still win rate negative on this champion. If for somehow 2AD really completely crushes AS growth, we will follow up for compensation nerfs here, but that is the goal there, is to try to give her a bit more early agency and make her less of just a scaler waiting to be useful over the course of time, and that's the intent, that's the goal. Final change here is to Quinn. Quinn basically re-architecting the damage to use a bonus AD ratio. This is basically a normal spell, and so using sort of normal spell architecture makes sense to me, but basically just trying to nerf some of her late laning phase wave clear. This is going to be most felt levels 3 through essentially 12. Rank 1, level 2 of the ability is almost same damage. Rank 5, level 13 of the ability, almost same damage as well. And again, the gold scaling of the attack damage ratio, unchanged. But because you typically max this ability second, you're going to have this trough here where you're level 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, where you're on rank 1, rank 2 of the ability, and your total AD isn't increasing the damage. And so you will see a power trough in sort of the later landing phase as a result of this one. This is basically aiming at how much wave clear she has access to with how she's building Static Shiv, going Mobies now, and so she's kind of running around the map. It's going to kind of slow down that map access somewhat. Quinn, a bit overperforming, one of the highest win rate top laners in the game, especially in higher elos, and so dropping some of the wave clear into roam power to try to make her a more balanced champion overall. One thing I want to bring up is the follow-up on Bel'Veth Rec runes. So if you can't read everything, this one on the left is 15.13, this one on the right is 15.14, and I'm looking at only the win rate of Conqueror rune pages, so we're not getting biased by what keystone you're running. So I want to call out in the bottom left here, this is the win rate data between running the Adaptive Force and Attack Speed Stat Shard, and it was a 5.3% win rate gap because every Conqueror rune page recommended rune gave the Attack Speed Shard, and of course good Bel'Veth players knew that they should be running the Adaptive Force Shard, and so you saw a 5.3% win rate gap. Now, some of that is the bias you get from it not being a rec rune, meaning you get a generic win rate inflation there, and some of it being that the rune itself was actually more powerful. And so a mix of those two things created an observed 5.3% win rate gap. We go to 15.14, where I updated both the Conqueror pages to only give you the Adaptive Force Shard. What we see is now a 0.7% win rate increase, or the Attack Speed Stat Shard is 0.7% win rate higher. Should you go for the AS Shard? Is the win rate higher? Of course not. Of course you shouldn't. Because again, you're going to see 2-ish% win rate gaps anytime a rune is recommended. Now in Bel'Veth's case, looking more like 3, but still, right, pretty close to that number being the case in most, for the most part. And so what we see is a 3.3% win rate drop to the Adaptive Force Stat Shard simply because it became the recommended rune. And we see a 2.7% win rate jump to the Attack Speed Stat Shard by no longer being recommended. Now, that one, the sample size is a bit more suspect, plus or minus 1% win rate, because only 10,000 games on the new unrecommended AS Stat Shard. But the point is, you get to see, again, a 3% win rate jump from going from not recommended to being recommended, right? That's the tax paid, which means a 5% win rate gap turns into a 0% win rate gap, roughly, when it goes the other way around, which means anytime you see another rune, you're like, oh, I see this Legend Bloodline. I see this Legend Bloodline that's like 1.4% win rate higher, or I see this Last Stand rune that's like a 2% win rate higher. Should I jump for that one? Well, what do we see from the Stat Shard? You saw a really, really large swing of multiple percentage. So is it really better? Probably not. But I want to point that out. Anytime you see like this small 1 or 2% win rate gap, doesn't mean the rune is necessarily better. Oftentimes, recommended runes are actually the best, and you don't have to do anything too special there. That's going to do it for the patch. Thanks for watching. See you next time. Bye-bye.